Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start. I call to order the informal meeting of the plenary to observe the Nelson Mandela International Day. Members will recall that the Nelson Mandela International Day was designated in Resolution 64/13 of 10th November 2009. That's 2009. I would like to warmly welcome you all to this meeting. As mentioned in my letter dated 23rd May, 24th June and 15th July 2025, in accordance with Resolution 68/275 of 6 June 2014 and 69/269 of 2nd April 2015, the Assembly established the United Nations Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela Prize as an honorary award to be presented once every 5 years as a tribute to recognize the outstanding achievements of 2 individuals, 1 female and 1 male, who have dedicated their lives to the service of humanity by promoting the purposes and principles of the United Nations while honoring and paying homage to Nelson Mandela's extraordinary legacy of reconciliation, political transition, and social transformation. Excellencies, distinguished laureates, ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate one of the towering figures of our time, Nelson Mandela. We honor his courage, his leadership in the struggle for freedom, and his lifelong commitment to unity across Africa. Madiba embodied the values of peace, equality, human rights, and service to others. He reminded us that freedom is meaningless without justice, that justice is the bedrock of peace, that peace depends on institutions that protect the rights and dignity of all people, and that these fundamental freedoms must never be compromised. In a world still divided by conflict and inequalities, Mandela's legacy urges us to still choose dialogue over hatred, understanding over fear and vengeance, and unity above all. Indeed, it is still in our hands to combat inequality and poverty, as this year's theme reminds us. This duty does not rest with any single leader or nation. It belongs to us all, belongs to all peoples, belongs to all nations. Dear friends, today's commemoration holds special significance, for we also host the award ceremony for the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize. This is the 3rd edition of this prestigious award. It is conferred every 5 years to those who have dedicated their lives to the service of humanity and advancing the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It is my honor to welcome and congratulate this year's distinguished laureates. First, Ms. Brenda Reynolds of Canada is a social worker who brings a lifetime of lived experience, advocacy, and leadership to the forefront of indigenous peoples' health, mental wellness, and reconciliation efforts both in Canada and internationally. Second, Mr. Kennedy Odede of Kenya is an advocate of social entrepreneurship and community development. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Shining Hope for Communities, which empowers local communities and delivers vital services to over 2.4 million people each year. The selection of these remarkable leaders sends a powerful message that grassroots leadership places the power in our hands to create change, that each of us can make a difference. In this regard, I express my sincere appreciation to the selection committee comprised of the permanent representatives of Bahrain, Egypt, Finland, Poland, St. Kitts and Nevis, and South Africa as an ex officio member for their time, energy, and tireless engagement. I am also grateful to the eminent personalities who in their advisory capacity offered wisdom, invaluable advice, and insights that are pivotal in identifying laureates who reflect Mandela's spirit. Her Excellency Ms. Marcella Liebert, Governor General of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, Her Excellency Ms. Tarja Halonen, former President of the Republic of Finland, His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Mustafa El-Baradei, Nobel laureate, former Vice President of Egypt, and former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Ms. Elżbieta Mikos-Kuza, Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University of Warsaw, Poland. My sincere thanks also go to the Department of Global Communications and Under Secretary General Melissa Fleming for their extraordinary support. Excellencies, this year also marks the 10th anniversary of the Nelson Mandela Rules, the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, on which I convened a high-level debate last month. These rules are a testament to yet another aspect of Nelson Mandela's legacy, justice, and dignity for all everywhere. It is a legacy born from 27 years spent behind prison bars, where Mandela held firm to the belief that freedom, dignity, and equality were not just a dream for the few, but a destiny for all. Excellencies, this dream now rests in our hands. Nelson Mandela's life was a call to action, one that rings across generations today. As we mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, let us draw strength from his courage. Let us realize the promise of the United Nations Charter. Let us reaffirm faith in human rights, in the dignity and worth of human person, in equality between men and women. And let us establish conditions that ensure justice and respect for the obligations arising from the law. Our abiding aim must be to strengthen multilateralism so that tomorrow's leaders who will write its next chapters pick up a mantle of courage, compassion, and hope. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, as Madiba once said. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. Let us forge ahead and make a difference. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to His Excellency António Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, Mandela Prize winners, Ms. Brenda Reynolds, Mr. Kennedy Odede, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we celebrate the life and legacy of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Madiba's extraordinary life was a triumph of the human spirit. He endured the brutal weight of oppression and emerged not with a vision of vengeance and division, but of reconciliation, peace, and unity. Today, Madiba's legacy is now our responsibility. We must carry forward this commitment to peace, justice, and human dignity. One of the central lessons of Mandela's life was that power is not a personal possession to be hoarded. Power is about lifting others up. It's about what we can achieve with one another and for one another. Power is about people. In every facet of his life, Nelson Mandela demonstrated the power of collective grassroots action to drive change and progress and deliver power to the powerless. This same spirit can be found in today's winners of the Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela Prize. Ms. Brenda Reynolds is a Saulteaux member from Fishing Lake First Nation in Canada. She's a social worker who turned the struggle against the most hideous of crimes against children into a national force for change, supporting and developing trauma responses for survivors and families of the residential school system. Mr. Kennedy Odede grew up in the Kibera slum in Kenya. A long-time community activist, the organization he founded unites community groups from across the country and now reaches more than 2.4 million people each year with essential services, everything from education to water. Both prize winners embody Nelson Mandela's words, which are engraved on their prizes, and I quote, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, it is what difference we have made to the lives of others." End of quote. On behalf of the United Nations, I congratulate Ms. Reynolds and Mr. Odede on this well-deserved recognition. Excellences,
Your Excellencies, as the United Nations celebrates its 80th anniversary, Nelson Mandela's legacy of reconciliation and transformation continues to inspire and to drive us. Around the world, human rights and dignity are under threat, not only from conflict and instability, but from systematic inequalities, exclusion, climate disasters, and the rollback of hard-won freedoms. Now is the time to renew our global commitment to the principles that define our organization and indeed the extraordinary life of Nelson Mandela. Freedom, justice, equal rights, solidarity, reconciliation, peace. Today and every day, let's continue following the path and principles set by Nelson Mandela's life of service and progress. I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Grace Naledi Mandisa Pandor, Chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, to deliver a keynote statement.
Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Excellency Secretary General, permanent representatives, invited guests. I wish to begin by thanking you all for being here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you all this morning. The Nelson Mandela Foundation expresses profound thanks to this body for allowing us this unique opportunity to address you on Nelson Mandela International Day. President Mandela had an enduring appreciation for the bold role the United Nations played in advancing South Africa's liberation struggle. The UN steered us to freedom, stood against apartheid domination, not through arms, but through bringing its undeniable moral weight into combat against injustice. That boldness, that courage is needed more and more today. And we hope as we remember and honor President Mandela, we recall his words, "It is in your hands." So what do we as the Foundation call on all of us to do today? On this day, Nelson Mandela International Day, our call to all of you is to remember to make good trouble. This call is inspired by the man himself. While we all refer to President Mandela by his first name, his given first name, Nelson, the name that he was actually given at birth was Rolihlahla. In isiXhosa, which was Mandela's mother tongue, and which is one of the main languages of our country, South Africa. The colloquial meaning of Rolihlahla is troublemaker. In true isiXhosa, it is shake the tree. Mandela was a troublemaker, the kind of good troublemaker that we need more of in the world today, and the kind that we will continue to need well into the future. The kind of troublemaker that some people did not always love because he pushed for an equality that we all should enjoy and for the overcoming of a system of oppression which was convenient and profitable to some, a system of oppression that was defeated in South Africa eventually, but which has yet to be eradicated globally. The foundation, which I now chair, often gets asked what Mandela would say or do on certain issues if he were alive today. We often ask this question of ourselves. In the context of my call here today, the question does arise, what kind of world would he be prepared to make good trouble for? Drawing on his life and work and his many personal reflections, we believe that it would be a just world, a world where justice does not kneel to the rich and powerful, where our collective upliftment takes precedence over individual privilege, where the benefits and burdens of our society are equally shared, where our privilege and personal biases do not sway us from being just, and where our like or dislike of someone does not hinder us from doing what is right in relation to them. President Mandela was a fierce man on matters of justice, but I don't recall one occasion where he was disrespectful or rude to another person. So this world where justice is respected and upheld is the kind of world that we are asking you to make good trouble for. Now, some may ask, as you sit here, that I'm an accountant, I am just a teacher, I am just a manager. What does making good trouble look like for me? While it can take on individual manifestations, let me suggest how we can bring it to life and give expression to it in our everyday lives. Firstly, making good trouble means being really excellent at what you do. You should have the knowledge that doing very well on your responsibilities contributes toward collective upliftment, regardless of whether people are watching or not, and regardless of the magnitude of the action. What we refer to sometimes as the ordinary has its own significance, and when done to the best of one's ability, this can make a positive impact on the lives of others and contribute toward better processes, systems, and institutional functioning. Second, making good trouble means always asking oneself the question as you go through life, how do I make change in the space that I'm in? Because it's incredible that we can be in significant spaces and achieve absolutely nothing. So how do I use my space to make a difference? And showing up to what that question reveals. These are the things that Nelson Mandela did. He aimed to be excellent in the things that he did, and he showed up to the question of how he could make change in the space that he was in with his whole self and not just a part of himself. The two awardees of this year's United Nations Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela Prize, Brenda Reynolds and Kennedy Odede, offer us further examples of people who are energetic in their pursuit of good trouble. Last night, we launched a really important exhibition for us right here at the UN. The exhibition is entitled Our Shared Humanity in Action. It focuses on the important role that the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid played in combating apartheid in South Africa. The committee was established by your body, the UN General Assembly, in 1962, and its work over the decades of its existence demonstrates what can be done when people come together to make good trouble for global equity. The committee demonstrated what can be done when diplomats come together, rise to the occasion, and dedicate themselves to the upliftment of people in need, out of the recognition that while they may not be their fellow national citizens, they are their fellow human beings. What brought freedom to South Africa was good trouble. And while making good trouble for global equity requires many things at this current juncture in our geopolitical domain, one of the things that is needed now is for us to contribute to building a stronger, reformed, and capable United Nations. As the foundation, we believe the UN must remain the premier multilateral body of our globe, and that we should support it to execute its very significant mandate. We need to democratize its structures. We need to have it more efficient. We need the Security Council to do the job it was established for, but we must maintain the UN. This must happen for the sake of the global community, and we must have change for the credibility of this organization. So as we celebrate 80 years of the UN, let us think about and build better for the next 80 years. When President Mandela came to the United Nations for the first time, he said that while the UN was in session, people would come up to him and shake hands with him, and that he could not bring himself, due to his good manners, to shake hands with people while seated. So he would instinctively get up as ambassadors approached him and shake hands with them. This, however, was not to the liking of his delegation, who told him, "Mr. President, you are disturbing the conference." And they asked him to leave and go back to his hotel, which, being Mandela, he did. I'm also reminded of the kind of heaviness with which he first came to the UN, given the challenges of South Africa's transition to democracy and the legacy he inherited. One can imagine, as he was negotiating, the weight on his shoulders as he spoke to colleagues in this chamber, but also the kind of reprieve he might have felt in the presence of so many country representatives committed to international solidarity and to support for a free South Africa. So let us too feel a reprieve in the company of all of us gathered here today. But let us leave here reminded of the work that each of us is called to contribute to. I trust that the memory of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela will keep inspiring all of us to do the work of transformation and to never give up on his dream of a just society and a just world. I will end my contribution this morning in the same way that President Mandela concluded his speech in 1990 when he addressed that special committee against apartheid in this very room. He said, "We also take this opportunity to extend warm greetings to all others who fight for their liberation and for their human rights, including the peoples of Palestine and Western Sahara. We commend their struggles to you, convinced that we are all moved by the fact that freedom is indivisible, convinced that the denial of the rights of one diminishes the freedom of others. I thank you once again for allowing me the opportunity to address you, particularly you, Mr. President and Secretary General. I wish all of you leave this room determined to make good trouble. Thank you very much.
I thank the chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. We will now proceed to the Nelson Mandela Prize award ceremony for our two laureates. It is my honor to present Mrs. Brenda Reynolds, Indigenous social worker from Canada. Ms. Reynolds is supported today by a proud community of Indigenous women and girls, men and boys. We warmly welcome to the General Assembly's Hall today the daughters of tradition and the sons of tradition visiting from the state of Wisconsin in the United States. Their presence here underscores the vital importance of preserving indigenous cultures and traditions with our global community. It also serves as a reminder that the work we honor in our laureates today has a profound impact on the lives of indigenous people. I invite Mrs. Brenda Reynolds to the stage to receive the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize presented by the Secretary General of the United Nations. We will now hear a statement by Mrs. Brenda Reynolds, the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize laureate. Mrs. Reynolds, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency and Mr. Secretary General, honored members of the United Nations, esteemed delegates, including the daughters of tradition and sons of tradition, thank you for joining us today, and my family members who have traveled here with me, and friends, and others who are watching at home and in their workplaces. Miigwech. I wish to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional homeland of the Lenape people. Sorry if I mispronounced that. When I first found out that I was one of the two laureates for this year's Nelson Mandela Awards, I was speechless and couldn't believe that I was selected. And even though I speak 2 languages, I still cannot find the words to express the depth of my gratitude and the humility I have to accept the United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize. And happy birthday to him in the heavens today, because now he is one of our ancestors. To receive a prize that holds the name of an iconic man who embodied peaceful resistance and reconciliation is a tremendous honor and a solemn responsibility. I am moved by the recognition by the United Nations, which continues to uphold the ideals of justice, peace, and human dignity. I am a Saulteaux woman from Fishing Lake First Nation, a reserve in Canada, who shared similar parallels to Nelson Mandela's experiences with our government's efforts to civilize and change who we are as Indigenous people to our homelands. And there are many parallels to what we had experienced in both our countries, where the governments impacted policies to change who we are, to face oppression, to face a violation of human rights in our countries. And it is from that perspective that I have been following and have had an interest in Nelson Mandela since I found out about him. One outstanding example, is when the South African government came to Canada during the 1930s to ask the Canadian government, how do you manage your Indigenous people? Their response was, we have them segregated on reserves, where they have to have a pass when they leave the reserves. We also give them status cards to identify who they are. That practice, some of those practices became the model that is known as apartheid in South Africa. A government practice here in Canada, not here, but in Canada, started by the forced removal of Indigenous children in the 1800s. The children were separated from their families, from their communities, and from their cultures, and placed in residential schools for the purpose of civilizing them, and also to eradicate their cultures. While attending the residential schools, the children experienced severe abuse. And one of the things that they were not permitted to do was to speak their language. But some of the abuse included the emotional abuse, where they were made to feel ashamed of who they are as Indigenous people. And I was not a residential school student, but my experience started when I became a counselor at Gordon's Indian Residential School in 1988. At that time in Saskatchewan, Gordon's was the only federally operated residential school. And while I was there, just before the end of the school year, one 13-year-old girl came to me and said she wanted to share with me her experiences of what was happening in the residential school. She was being sexually abused by a senior staff member. At the end of the night, we had 17 girls disclose that they were being sexually abused by the same staff member. And subsequently, I started hearing from other students about their experiences. And some of them were former students at that time, but they had also were talking about their own experiences of sexual abuse. And the person that senior staff member, he was charged and convicted, and he became the first person of a residential school to be convicted. So these charges were the beginning of other disclosures that came from across Canada from survivors who were speaking about their sexual abuse experiences. Those charges and disclosures became the largest class action lawsuit to date in Canada. And that lawsuit is known as the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. Under the settlement agreement was a provision to provide emotional support, for Canada to provide emotional support. And I was asked to develop a pilot called the Resolution Health Support Program. And I developed the program that included training Indigenous people from communities and cultural support workers to provide emotional support to survivors, their families, and once the Truth and Reconciliation started in Canada, we provided support to Canadians attending the hearings that we had across Canada. And what I did for 7 years, when I trained the workers on a monthly basis, I trained them to understand what the long-lasting effects of childhood trauma and what those impacts are on their survivors and also intergenerationally. But we have to remember that trauma experienced in genocide is not the trauma that is defined in the Western sense. In the Western sense, trauma is an experience where it's a short, brief experience, and then you return to a normal state. But when you're experiencing genocide, you learn to live with the trauma, and that has severe impacts on you. And so these experiences of abuse and the attempt to eradicate the culture, and were some of the experiences that we started to hear in the beginning of the settlement agreement. And we also heard of students going through medical experimentation, and we still continue to hear of cases of forced and coerced sterilization. But when someone is living in a state of trauma, they stay in that elevated state of response, and that becomes normal, because you're with a perpetrator and you're living in a system where you are facing racism and discrimination. And secondly, what I did with the trainer when I was training the workers was that for them to understand the settlement agreement and what the provisions were and what options were for the survivors that they can go through under the settlement agreement. And I did this at a grade 3 education level, because this is what the survivors were saying, is that I went to school for 8 years, but I came out with a grade 3 education. So for them to understand what was available to them, I ensured that the information we provided was at a grade 3 level that they can understand. Furthermore, what I did is I also included Indigenous culture as a part of the healing, the education, and the emotional support. The eradication of the culture was to not be comfortable with who you are as an Indigenous person, and that our ways were heathen ways. And so, but I know from my own experience that culture was healing for me, and it was a part of my identity and a part of my own healing. And I was fortunate to grow up with my cultural ceremonies and practices in my own language ever since since birth. And in all Indigenous cultures, as we traveled across Canada and as we worked with people, is that there are healing practices in words where we can understand what trauma is and how it impacts us and what those symptoms are. And so it was important to me to have that included as the healing process. And so we provided emotional support to survivors as they proceeded through the hearings serious harms. We had one category within the settlement agreement where serious harms were done in private hearings. And now we had over 36,000 people that went through those hearings in serious harms. And what Canada has done is destroyed the evidence from those hearings so that they cannot be opened and shared. So that was one of the unfortunate things that has happened. And when the TRC started, we started taking statements, started having public hearings, and we would have public and private hearings for truth-telling. And like I had said previously, that's when we started hearing more experiences of the violation of human rights. But before the hearings, what we did as emotional support providers is that we taught the survivors on how to prepare. What was it out of their experiences did they want to share with the public? And remember, for many of them, they had never shared their experiences before because they weren't believed. And also, when they were sharing their truth-telling, is how they can manage their re-traumatization. How is it that we could support them through this process? And so when the hearings came, whether it was private or public hearings, is that we provided support during the hearings as well. And then we reminded them of what their coping strategies were. And after the hearings, we always followed up to ensure that they remained emotionally safe and that they were accessing their supports that they had in place. And when we held the community information sessions, we also advised them on what to expect during the process and how it was all going to be formulated. The health support workers were also survivors of the Indian residential schools or child welfare system or the boarding homes or the Indian hospitals, or they were also intergenerationally impacted. Some of the workers themselves had generations of family being in residential schools. And so one of the things that I had done during the training was that, and this is my belief, is that if you had not dealt with your own traumatic experiences, you're not going to be able to provide support if you can't understand what the healing process is. And so it was very important as a part of the training, and my support to the workers is to provide them ideas on how it is that they can address their own experiences so that they can work with others and their perpetrators as well. So each month I provided training on self-care management, but self-care management had to become a lifestyle. It couldn't be something where you turned on and looking after yourself from 9 o'clock and to 4 o'clock and then that's it. It had to become a lifestyle. And we also provided debriefing so that the trauma we can process the trauma it is that they had witnessed and that they had heard or were even triggered. And the additional training was on upcoming and ongoing trauma management. The workers became absolutely the best trauma response workers. They were just absolutely the best. But what I noticed during this process as time was going on and as time was unfolding and we were working with survivors all over Alberta and all over Canada is that, similar to what Mandela said about letting go of resentment to move forward and where you can create a better future for yourself and for your family. This is what was happening to the workers and to the survivors. And they were changing and finding peace with their genocidal experiences. And it was amazing to see the people it was that they were coming forward in that whole process. It was amazing. They were understanding more of what happened to them, how they responded to their trauma, and how they were able to let go of that once that understanding was in place. We were peace building within individuals and families. Peace begins with individuals, and from there you can find peace within your family and within your communities. We were creating change by providing support. Today I continue to work with educating organizations and communities to understand the impacts of what we know is cultural genocide and with trauma. And I am currently working on a doctorate in psychology. And my research is on trauma interventions for cultural genocide. As Indigenous people and as people with minorities, we have our ways of dealing with trauma. That has to become evidence-based. This is the purpose of my research. And I'm writing the last chapter of my research, and I'll have that finished by the end of August next month. But I wanted to thank the United Nations, the Secretary General, and the selection committee for the selection. I am just deeply, deeply honored with that. And I also want to thank you for recognizing this path of justice, reconciliation, and healing. A path that is shared journey of cultural survival and a global commitment to dignity, to peace and collective healing. And Mandela's spirit, today on his birthday, let us continue his work where dignity is stored and we can honor peace building. And I also want to end with the day that I found out that I was selected, that night I had a dream of him and he reached out his hand to me. I took his hand and I will continue to hold his hand in this journey that I have of peace building. Miigwech.
I thank Mrs. Reynolds. It is my honor to present Mr. Kennedy Odede, founder and chief executive officer of Shining Hope for Communities from Kenya. I invite members to view a short video on his work.
Life is changing, and when I see Kibera today, it's not the same Kibera that I saw yesterday. That gives me hope. Growing up in Kibera was lively, and at the same time was also hard. At a very early age, I ran away so that I can survive because we didn't have enough food in the house. So I became a street kid or a homeless kid. If I didn't suffer in this poverty, I could have seen what I could do. Although there is this struggle that these people don't really have much, but if you follow their heart, it is so wealthy. This community were really, they participated in my growth. This is where I have my boys, our girls, our friends, our family. When I walk around here, you see that community. We have the same mission. What unites us together? Everyone is dreaming for future. We cannot see and hear that a 4-year-old girl is raped. We cannot wait and hear that a talented kid who could be the president is denied education because we are still waiting. The more we wait, we are losing a lot of things. Now, what can we do now? Ghetto is a place of ideas. Ghetto is a place of strength. My dream is to bring the ghetto together. It doesn't have to come from outside. The solution is there. Only if we come together. The solutions are in the community. We started by doing small things. People know us. But slowly, we are growing. We are learning. How can we make our things unique? How can we have our school? When the people are leading it and they own it, it can really be strong. And I loved it. You know why I loved it? Because we took over. We took over. So the people who seem to be poor are now running school for girls, health center and water. It was so powerful to see these girls in uniform. These kids speak English, they are so smart, they are so curious. It will push the future Kenyan leaders, women leaders. Women will be the stars in the community. So I saw that people are vibrant. You go there and just watch. You see the activities that's going there. It's what gives hope. It comes down to people. This is an urban movement of social change, a united force who are coming together to change the society. And we just believe that it is possible. Another world is possible.
It is my honor I invite Mr. Kennedy Odede to the stage to receive the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize presented by the Secretary General of the United Nations. We will now hear a statement by Mr. Kennedy Odede, the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize laureate. Mr. Odede, you have the floor.
Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit, from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be. For my unconquerable soul, during 27 years behind bars, Nelson Mandela recited the poem Invictus to keep his spirit strong. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. These words reminded him that even in captivity, his soul remained free. Mandela understood the poetry and the act of turning within possessed great power. He observed that poetry bears witness to injustice, and in doing inner work, Mandela cultivated what he called a flower in a graveyard. For him, Invictus became a flower, an affirmation of unbreakable human dignity. It became my flower too. Mandela's favorite poem, my daily mantra. I grew up in Kibera, Kenya, one of Africa's largest slums, a place too often reduced to statistics of poverty rather than recognized for its profound reserves of human potential. At 10 years old, fleeing domestic violence, I joined the ranks of Nairobi street children. One day, I stole a mango because I was starving. A mob gathered to beat me dead until a stranger stepped forward, paid for that mango, and in that single act of grace, showed me that kindness could interrupt the cycles of violence. My head is bloody, but unbowed. Mandela taught me that strength is not the absence of struggle. It is what we choose to build within that struggle. 20 years ago, as a young man working in a factory for barely $1 a day, I saved 20 cents to buy a soccer ball. That ball was not just for play. It was a tool for organizing, a center around which a community could form. That community became Shining Hope for Communities, SHOFCO, as we call it. We didn't start with grand plans of any money, but with each other and a shared vision of what Kibera could become. a beacon of light and hope for the world. We cleared garbage. We built schools where girls could learn without fear. We brought clean water to neighborhoods where families once spent an entire day's wages for a single bucket. We didn't seek permission from those in power. We exercised the power within us. And yet, the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. That spirit of fearlessness, service, drives our work today. Shofco, now two decades later, has grown to over 90 places across Kenya, each driven and led by the community themselves. Over 4 million people have been directly impacted. That includes 1.3 million youth leaders who have been trained, and over 150,000 children treated for malnutrition, 40,000 households receiving clean water, and this is amazing, over $10 million in loans to the poor in the family, and they raised that money themselves. Mandela showed all of us that, at Shofco, that leadership is not a privilege reserved for those born to power. It belongs to anyone willing to serve and look within. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment at the scroll. Mandela faced a systematic engineer to destroy him, and instead built something greater than what had been destroyed. In so many communities like Kibera, the gates of opportunity remain narrow. But at Shofco, we are not waiting for permission to belong the future we are building. We are demonstrating that transformative leadership emerges precisely from the places the world overlooks. Not just to walk through existing gates, but to widen them for others. Madiba once said, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have taken a moment to rest, but I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities." He said this after he had endured nearly 3 decades in prison, after he had emerged without bitterness, and he invited his jailers to sit in front row at his inauguration. Madiba understood that power was not the destination. It is the obligation to keep walking. Shofco began on a dirt path in Kibera slums, a soccer ball, a circle of young people, and a shared refusal to be defined by what the world expected of us. Today, it is a movement reaching millions. But this is not the victory. Our future is not a single program or a new initiative. It is a new architecture of trust, where design begins with dignity, and where leadership flows from those who have lived the reality they now seek to change. We are walking that long road still. Thank you to the many people in this room today and those around the world who have walked this road with me and with us. Like Madiba, we do not walk it alone. And we do not walk it afraid. Because even now, especially now, we know that he knew, and we must remind one another that no matter the gate, no matter the scroll, we remain the masters of our fate. the captains of our soul. Happy birthday, Nelson Mandela. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Odede. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Gambia, who will speak on behalf of the African states.
Secretary General, distinguished delegates, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, on behalf of the African Group, I thank you for convening this important event in remembrance of one of our own, President Nelson Mandela, under the theme, "It is still in our hands to combat poverty and inequity." I would start with a quote of President Nelson Mandela, that, and I quote, "Overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity. It is an act of justice. It is the protection of a fundamental human right, the right to dignity and a decent life. While poverty persists, there is no freedom. The very right to be human is denied every day to hundreds of millions of people as a result of poverty." Mr. President, poverty and inequity remain challenges of our time. Extreme poverty is on the rise, debt is in distress, energy and food prices are soaring. Developing countries and middle-income countries suffer most with unemployment rates beyond records. It is time for solidarity, partnerships, and genuine actions where they are most needed. We must review the international financial architecture, adopt by consensus, the tax convention, renew our commitment to market access, production patterns, control global warming, safe environment, and ensure strong health systems globally. Ladies and gentlemen, as we seek a world in which men are free from the burden of ignorance, poverty, hunger, and diseases, in his words, President Nelson Mandela says, and I quote, "Poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by actions of human beings." We further emphasize that, and I quote, "If people can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." Excellencies, while the Durban Declaration and Program of Action calls for concerted measures to combat racism in all its manifestations, including through strengthened education, guaranteed economic development, promoting racial and economic justice, and improve available means and resources for victims of racism, apartheid, and colonialism. It also acknowledges that poverty, underdevelopment, marginalization, social exclusion, and economic disparities contribute to the persistence of racist attitudes and practices in the turn generating more poverty. Distinguished delegates, the African Group realizes that there is a continued increase of wealth between and within countries, with the concentration of it in fewer hands. We believe that rising inequity and pervasive discrimination are not inevitable. They are as a result of decades of policies and dynamics emanating from colonialism, apartheid, and discrimination. While disease pandemics continue to roll back efforts to build better lives for all, contradicting with the purpose, principles, and aspirations of the United Nations Charter, which assures human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction, thereby leading to equal rights, equal opportunities, better standards of life, economic and social empowerment of all peoples, and the attainment of peace and security. Mr. President, the 2030 Agenda and its development goals, due to expire in 5 years, set out a paradigm for more inclusive and sustainable development without discrimination. We hope that the Summit of the Future, adopted in September last year, would truly renew our commitments, pool efforts to action, and push the 2030 Agenda forward in line with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Financing for Development. The African Group also applaud the international community for convening in November 2025 the Second World Social Summit, intended to address gaps and recommit to the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and Program of Action, since its implementation gives momentum towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda, its goals, and the African Union Agenda 2063. Mr. President, the group believes that it is time to work in partnerships to address the root causes of conflict, crisis, deprivation, and discrimination, to close the digital divide, and to reverse the inequity division between and within countries. We must keep the momentum and ensure stronger political will and multilateral solidarity to achieve universal economic and social protection by 2030. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Mr. President, in concluding, the African Group reaffirms that the fight against poverty should also be accompanied with a battle against inequity. As the global community, we must commit to end poverty and inequity with their manifestations, fight corruption, cut the illicit financial flows, tackle debt distress, commit to the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change, lift sanctions, especially on medicines and treatments, create trade, close the digital divide gap, and ensure partnerships and investments in countries with the greatest need, and attain decent work for all, including for women and young people. Closing the inequity gaps, building peace and development demands the united effort of us all. It is indeed in our hands to create a better world for all who live in it. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Gambia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq, who will speak on behalf of the Asia Pacific states.
Mr. President, it's my distinct honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Asia Pacific Group on the occasion of the Nelson Mandela International Day 2025, and to join you in the formal recognition of the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize laureates. Today, we gather not only to honor the life and legacy of one of the most revered figures of our time, Nelson Mandela, but also to reaffirm the enduring relevance of his values: human dignity, justice, reconciliation, and equality. The Asia-Pacific Group pays solemn tribute to the extraordinary leadership and moral courage of Mr. Mandela, whose lifelong struggle against apartheid and racial oppression remains a timeless inspiration to the peoples and nations around the world. His legacy transcends borders and generations, his principles, commitment to the nonviolence and forgiveness. Mr. President, the theme of this year's commemoration, it is still in our hands to fight poverty and inequality, speaks directly to the core of Mr. Mandela's mission. The Asia-Pacific Group aligns itself firmly with this call to action. We recognize that the eradicating poverty and confronting inequality are not merely goals, they are more imperative that demands sustained multilateral cooperation. The Asia-Pacific Group extends its sincere congratulations to the 2025 laureates of the Nelson Mandela Prize, Ms. Brenda Reynolds of Canada and Mr. Kennedy Odede of Kenya. Their unwavering commitment to social justice, healing, and community empowerment exemplifies the spirit of Nelson Mandela legacy. Their work from supporting indigenous survivors of historical injustice to transforming urban communities through dignity and hope serves as a powerful reminder of the profound impact of compassion in the action. Mr. President, the Asia-Pacific region markets its diversity, resilience, and dynamism, continues to draw inspiration from Mr. Mandela's legacy, steadfast in our commitments to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. And we reaffirm our collective determination to promote peace, development, and human rights for all. Let us remember today and always that the legacy of Nelson Mandela is not merely a chapter in history, but continuing call to action. It remains our responsibility to advance the vision he upheld, a world founded on justice, dignity, and equality for all. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Barbados, who will speak on behalf of the Latin American and Caribbean states.
Mr. President, distinguished prize winners, excellencies, colleagues, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the group of Latin American and Caribbean states. I begin by congratulating the two prize winners today. As we gather to honor the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela, a man whose courage, conviction, and compassion reshaped history. His unwavering commitment to justice, to equality and human rights stands as a lasting example of moral leadership and of the triumph of hope over despair. In reflecting on his extraordinary legacy, GRULAC would like to highlight three key dimensions of President Mandela's enduring impact. First, the global importance of his leadership and moral vision. Second, the continued relevance of his principles in addressing today's global challenges. And third, the call to action that this day represents for us all. Mr. President, first we honor Nelson Mandela's legacy and global impact. His journey from prisoner of conscience to president of a free and democratic South Africa embodies the ideals enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. He showed us that peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice, dignity, and reconciliation. As GRULAC, we stand in solidarity with the people of South Africa and all nations working to uphold the values President Mandela championed. His legacy is not limited by geography or by language. It speaks to the aspirations of people across our own region and around the world for inclusive development, non-discrimination, and equal opportunity. Second, Mr. President, we reaffirm the principles that President Mandela stood for, especially as we face today's challenges. The General Assembly's declaration of 18 July as Nelson Mandela International Day and the creation of this prize reflect the United Nations recognition of his extraordinary contribution to humanity. Today, more than ever, we are called to stand by the values he upheld. His fight against racial injustice under apartheid South Africa demonstrated an unmatched will and courage to defend justice and equity and called on all peoples to join this important struggle. The indomitable spirit of President Mandela showed that it was possible to drive forth change for the equal treatment and mutual respect of all people, despite the monumental challenges faced. His resolute values and moral character further demonstrated that pursuing peace was the means by which to overcome this injustice. These principles must continue to guide our responses to crises, wherever they occur, and shape our efforts to build a world anchored in both peace and sustainable development. And third, Mr. President, Nelson Mandela Day is not just a day of remembrance, it is a call to action. President Mandela said, quote, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead," unquote. Let us remember the spirit of service. Let us channel it into acts of kindness, advocacy, and solidarity, and into tangible efforts that improve the lives of people and uphold their dignity. Above all, we must recognize that the scale of today's challenges demands a response far greater than past achievements required. The spirit of Mandela calls us not to replicate past success, but to rise far above them to meet the urgency of now with the courage of transformative action. Mr. President, in closing, GRULAC reaffirms its strong commitment to the values of peace, human dignity, and solidarity. We are committed to carrying forward the spirit of President Mandela in our multilateral engagement, and we stand ready to work constructively with all member states to advance our shared goals of peace, progress, and dignity for all. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Barbados. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway, who will speak on behalf of the Western European and other states.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the members of the Western European and other states group as we come together to mark Nelson Mandela International Day 2025. I would like to congratulate the two laureates of the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize, Ms. Brenda Reynolds of Canada and Mr. Kennedy Odede of Kenya. Two individuals whose inspiring and impressive work within their communities and beyond are the epitome of what Nelson Mandela stood for. We should all strive to take a page from their books and work towards a better world. Since the General Assembly first established this commemoration in 2009, every 18th of July has stood as a powerful reminder of the enduring legacy of Nelson Mandela, a legacy rooted in the pursuit of freedom, equality, and dignity for all. His legacy is also one of determination and reconciliation, which is more important than ever as we call for peace to prevail. As we face a world marked by overlapping crises and erosion of trust in global institutions, Mandela's example offers direction. His unparalleled courage in confronting injustice and his unwavering faith in the potential of humanity must continue to inspire and guide us. In 2005, with great foresight of our world today, Mandela delivered a clear and urgent appeal, and I quote, "Do not look the other way. Do not hesitate. Recognize that the world is hungry for action, not words. Act with courage and vision." End of quote. This year's theme, "It is still in our hands to combat poverty and inequality," calls us to collective action. It reminds us that the tools for change already exist and that Mandela's legacy does not belong to the history books. It lives in the choices we make and the courage we summon today to stand up against injustice. The challenges before us are stark. As of the latest estimates, 700 million people remain trapped in extreme poverty. Inequities persist, often deepening in the very places where peace remains fragile. And yet, there is progress and potential. In communities everywhere, people are acting boldly and creatively to build more equitable societies. Mr. President, let us focus our efforts on peace, human rights, sustainability, gender equality, education, and meaningful inclusion, not as ideals, but as non-negotiable building blocks for a fairer world. We are entrusted with an opportunity to rebuild trust, deepen cooperation, and renew the global commitment to leaving no one behind. Mandela's life teaches us that even in the face of impossible odds, transformation is possible if we act with unity, humility, and vision. Mr. President and dear colleagues, let us honor that call. Let us embody his legacy, not only with speeches, but with moral courage to act together and now. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway. I would like to inform the Assembly that I have received requests from additional member states to speak in this commemorative meeting. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
President of the General Assembly, Mr. Philemon, Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. António Guterres, Chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Dr. Naledi Pandor, honored recipients of the Nelson Mandela Prize, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, today is both an honor and a privilege to deliver the statement on behalf of South Africa as we commemorate International Nelson Mandela Day, a day intended not only to honor Nelson Mandela, but also to encourage and guide our own growth and transformation. Every year, we take a moment to reflect on the life and legacy of a man whose moral courage and unwavering commitment to justice reshaped a nation and inspired a global movement. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was and remains a towering symbol of humanity, humility, and hope. Whilst we may appear to be commemorating his memory, we are, in truth, recalling his values. Values of integrity, compassion, forgiveness, and above all, the relentless pursuit of equality and dignity for all. Madiba taught us that the leadership is expressed through purpose and not power, and that to lead is an act of service to people, not one of domination and being served by people. In these uncertain and divided times, we should hold true the strength of unity and reconciliation. Indeed, Mandela once commented, "In the end, what will unite us most strongly and provide the surest foundation for our new nation is joint action to build a future for all our people, regardless of our political affiliation." While speaking about South Africa, the sentiment is easily expanded to humanity and the power of unity. We are currently faced with immense challenges that are at times seem difficult to overcome, possibly even overwhelming. Yet we have history to remind us that through unity, humanity has beaten the odds before. We need to reaffirm our commitment to respectful and equitable relations and partnerships among nations. We should continue to build institutions that equitably serve nations and the people they represent. And we should remain true to the decisions we have made and honor commitments therein. Mr. President, International Nelson Mandela Day is not just about honoring his legacy. It serves as an annual reminder that our journey is not complete and our individual contributions to collective action matter. We must become the agents of change we wish to see. We should stand against inequality and injustice. And as we mark this day, let us renew our shared commitment to the ideals personified by Madiba. Let us retain his enduring faith in the goodness of people. We should mark this day not only by words, but by acts that honor his legacy. It is the legacy that is marked by a movement for true equality and a better world. I wish to close by recalling Nelson Mandela's guiding words to us as leaders. We need the commitment of leaders at all levels in order to achieve the better life of all that we promised to our people. As we rise to meet the challenges of our time, we must lead with courage, serve with humility, and walk forward with hope. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, Excellencies, we align ourselves with Barbados' statement on behalf of GRULAC. It's a real honour for Cuba to participate in this meeting to commemorate International Nelson Mandela Day, a day for us to reflect on the values of peace, dignity, social justice and solidarity, the values that embodied this exceptional man. For the Cuban people, Madiba is not only a universal symbol, he is also a brother in arms whose story is intimately linked to ours. We're united by a relationship that was forged in the toughest days of the fight against apartheid, when the solidarity between our peoples became a common front. As was stated by the General of the Army, Raul Castro, Africa's cause has always been Cuba's cause. It was this solidarity that Madiba recognised and was grateful for. In his visit to Havana in 1991, he said, "We will never forget that the Cuban people were the only ones that fought and won for us." This quote summarizes the profound respect between two peoples and between two great men, Fidel and Mandela. President Nelson Mandela and Fidel Castro shared not only a sincere friendship, but also a common vision of human beings, of justice, under the premise that no power or hegemonic interest should be placed above the dignity of mankind. Both defended the solidarity and unity of the South as a way to achieving a more just international order. Both knew that freedom is not authentic if it doesn't deliver real rights for the poorest people. Today, when new forms of exclusion, neocolonialism, xenophobia and racism are threatening humanity, the example of Mandela is more necessary than ever. Cuba continues its commitment to this legacy. Although still facing huge challenges, nobody can stop our medical cooperation in Africa, our contribution to the training of thousands of young Africans, and our solidarity to Africa, which is unwavering. Nelson Mandela lives in every single act of justice, in every battle against inequality, in every gesture of solidarity between peoples. As stated by the brother, President Miguel Díaz-Canel of Cuba, Mandela represents the best of the human soul, the value of resistance, the power of forgiveness without renouncing one's principles. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to the ideals of Madiba, and we do this convinced that his example will continue to guide peoples who are fighting for a more just and inclusive world. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Burundi.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, on this International Day, Nelson Mandela International Day, Burundi associates itself with the international community and also pays tribute to this exceptional man, the man of unshakable commitment to justice, freedom, peace, who left an indelible trace in the history of humankind. Nelson Mandela was not just a leader of a people. He remains a symbol of resistance to oppression and shows us what humanity can do when it frees itself from hatred, vengeance, and division. Throughout his life, Madiba incarnated the values of courage, dignity, dialogue, and forgiveness. He led South Africa towards democracy and reconciliation without ever giving in to the appeal of vengeance. As he said himself, to be free, it does not just mean getting rid of one's chains. It means living in a way which respects and strengthens the freedom of others. Mr. President, the people of Burundi have a very emotional memory of the historic role played by Nelson Mandela in the peace process in Burundi. In 1979 and 1989, we picked up the conciliation flame of President Nyerere, and Nelson Mandela spared no effort so as to bring people together, bring together hearts and minds. Through his moral standing, his natural authority, and his deep humanity, he gained the trust of the Burundian parties and made sure that wisdom reigned. And this led to reconciliation and opened the pathway towards peace. His personal commitment has led to the signature of the Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement in Burundi on the 28th of August 2000. And this was a turning point, which still today is a foundation of stability and national reconciliation and democracy in my country. In this For us, he will forever remain an architect of peace, and he showed us that lasting peace is not built through domination or through exclusion, but rather through compromise, mutual respect, and justice. Mr. President, the heritage of Nelson Mandela is not limited to South Africa or the African continent even. It belongs to the global, universal heritage. His fight against apartheid, racism, inequality, but also for education, human rights, solidarity amongst peoples. These struggles remain very relevant in a world today facing many challenges. And this is a message that's intergenerational and recalls for us that education is the most powerful tool we can use so as to change the world. And it is by following this path that Burundi has committed itself to build a democratic society, a more equitable one, and more resilient one, following our vision of an emerging country. Please allow me to, Mr. President, on this solemn day, to congratulate the prize winners of the Mandela Prize, congratulate them of their dedication to the service of humanity. For Burundi, paying tribute to Mandela is not just through words, but also through actions, by identifying and praising those who help move us towards reconciliation, social justice, and human dignity. It's also a way of perpetuating his legacy and continuing his work, serving his ideals and acting so as to help build the rule of law, fundamental rights, social cohesion, protecting the most vulnerable, and work towards a better world. As was recalled by Nelson Mandela with humility, he said, "I'm not a saint unless you consider that every saint is a sinner who continues trying." On this symbolic day, we reiterate our commitment to equitable multilateralism, which is to bring justice and which help us remember the struggle for freedom. Let his legacy continue inspiring present and future generations and help us on our collective path toward the world of peace, tolerance, and shared humanity. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Burundi. We have heard the last speaker for this meeting. Before concluding, and as announced in the President's letter dated 10th July, I would like to invite members to participate in the traditional Nelson Mandela International Day public service activity, which will take place today from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. at Governor's Island in the New York Harbor. The informal meeting of the plenary on the observance of the annual Nelson Mandela International Day is now concluded. Members are reminded that the 85th plenary meeting of the Assembly will be held immediately following the adjournment of this meeting. The meeting is adjourned.